Joshua Shea, how's it going?
I'm doing very well, Jack. Thank you for having me here today.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. I'm really excited to have you on the podcast. You have a very interesting background with a very kind of, I'd say, a spicy subject that's not spoke about an awful lot, which is, however, quite evidently a problem. And I've had many conversations with many close friends and about the topic of pornography and how damaging it can potentially be um, to both normal adult people, but more importantly, the impact it can have on our children. So before we get into it, how about you just sort of tell us a little bit about yourself? Who is Joshua Shea?
Well, I am just a regular guy. I was born here in the United States, back in the mid 70s. I was, like any other kid, but when I was about 12, 13 years old, I was exposed to hardcore pornography magazines for the first time by a cousin, and it instantly resonated with me. It was like nothing I'd ever felt before. When people say, is this a real addiction? I knew I was addicted from the first time that I saw it, or maybe didn't know I was addicted, but I knew that I had found something. The only other time I felt like this for the first time ever was about 3 years later, the first time that I ever got truly drunk. And then for the rest of my life, up until about 7 years ago, and I'm 44 now, up until about 7 years ago, I used pornography and alcohol in tandem as addictions, and addictions that I hid well from people. But I used these addictions to try to get through my life. And when I finally faced the music, when I finally decided to get into recovery and get serious about my mental health, get serious about these addictions that have been plaguing me for so long and really tearing my life apart towards the end of them, that was when I started to learn just what a major problem pornography addiction was, especially with the generation that came right after me. When you look at people who grew up with the internet, and we're now talking about people who are largely 30, 31 years old and under, who don't really remember a world before the internet. Maybe they didn't get it till they were 7 or 8 years old in their house, but they don't remember a world before the internet. Statistics about this group are just alarming. There was a study here in the States, it's about 3 years old now, by an organization called the Barna Group. And they interviewed over 1,500 men. They found between the ages of 18 and 30, so that's essentially men under the age of 30, that 32% reported they either believed they had an issue with pornography or they believed that they had a full-on pornography addiction. And that absolutely blew my mind away. And as I was going, because that's 1 out of every 3 men under 30 in the US.
Who
And
were
I know
just the
that
ones willing to admit it as well.
exactly. And I know these statistics are very similar for Europe. They're very similar for the more developed countries in Africa and in South America, Asia as well. And what really struck me was I tried to get a lot of research done because that's kind of me. I'm a journalist by background. I became a journalist when I was 18 years old, and I did it pretty much full time until I was 37, 38. And I still take on freelance and ghostwriting assignments. It blew my mind how little there was about pornography addiction out there. I could learn a lot about addiction. I could learn about my alcoholism. There's a little bit about sex addiction, but intercourse has never been my addiction. It's been pornography. And I decided that with my background, with my ability to get in front of crowds and talk, and with the fact that there was nothing out there for people like me, because I think when we think of porn addict, we think of like a 19-year-old guy living in his mom's basement. He's never kissed a girl in real life. He's the typical incel. And when I actually went to an inpatient rehab facility facility for 7 weeks for my porn addiction. And I met men and women ranging from 18, 19 years old up through early 60s. I met doctors and lawyers and mothers and sisters
Mm.
and, you name it. It was anybody out there. And I decided that I wanted to create some resources. So I started writing books, started doing presentations about this because it is such a huge problem. It was a huge problem in my life. It almost cost me my marriage. It did cost me my professional career because it got out. And, I make the joke to people when I told people that I was going to rehab for alcoholism, they'd pat me on the back and shake my hand. And when I'd tell them that I was going to rehab for porn addiction, they wanted the hand sanitizer because it's such a taboo thing.
Of course.
And until we start talking about pornography and until we start to bridge this generation gap, which I really see around the age of 34, 35,
Mm.
we're not going to get very far because here's something that I've learned this year. I just put out my third book, which was called Porn in the Pandemic. Nobody over 35 years old really knows anything about OnlyFans. Most of them
Oh,
have never even heard of it.
this is where it's.
I've been introducing it to so many people who are 35 and older.
Mm.
Everybody under 35, it's an everyday part of the culture.
Mm. So just for those that don't know what just for those that don't know what OnlyFans is, before we move on, essentially, there's now an app where well, it's not limited to women, but mainly girls are using it. Maybe mainly the younger demographic. Sort of, what would you say, 18 to 24 is the
18
common.
to 18 to 24. And it's essentially, imagine an Instagram or a Facebook page that you have to subscribe to, that you have to spend $10 or whatever a month just to look at. And on that page, you've decided to subscribe to my page. On that page, I put up photos and I put up videos. Now, they can range from completely innocent to completely XXX hardcore. And they tend to run a little bit more towards that side of things. And along with just subscribing to my page, I can charge you more for pictures and for videos. Yeah. And I can also charge you just to text with me or just to send messages back and forth.
Yeah.
And this thing is exploding, especially during the pandemic. In January of 2020, there was just under 300,000 people using it. Right now, as we tape this in late August of 2020, there's almost 1 million people on this creating pornography. Yeah. And that's over 500,000 more people creating pornography. Yeah. Just 6-7 months down the road. And I think
the important part here is, these are normal people. These aren't porn stars. These are normal young teenage girls who are trying to earn money by exploiting themselves to strangers on the internet. Well, it's sort of like the gig economy has now filtered into the porn industry.
Well, think about it, though. They were living the gig economy as Uber drivers, as waitresses, as bartenders when the pandemic hit. And a lot of them didn't qualify for unemployment benefits given out wherever they happen to be in the world. So they've got to make some money to make rent. They've got to make some money to buy food. And because this youngest demographic, this youngest generation, grew up in a time where pornography was not that much of a taboo. It isn't a big deal. The idea for these young men and young women to show their bodies online, to sell their bodies online, isn't that big of a deal to them. Isn't a taboo, isn't something they wouldn't consider. So you now have hundreds of thousands of women and men around the world doing this. It shows no shortage of stopping. And one of the things that I've brought up to people over the last 6 months that we have to consider is we've always wondered what the fallout would be of every 12-year-old with a smartphone having nonstop access to pornography. And over the last 20 years, we've answered that question. It's not a good thing. Now what we have to ask ourselves is not only will pornography consumption be an addiction, but in 20 years, could pornography production be an addiction? because we now have so many more people creating pornography than ever before. And we've got your typical people saying, oh, they're going to regret these pictures, or, you know, all these other things. But I think we have to ask ourselves, what is going to be the real fallout of suddenly so many people making pornography? How is that going to affect them 15 years, 20 years from now? Not just in photos turning up, because I don't think that's going to be a big deal. So many people will have them. I wonder about the mental aspect. I wonder about any PTSD. I wonder about, you know, how do you move forward if you do this thing that you regret so much, or potentially regret so much? I think that these are unanswered questions that we have the opportunity to ask now,
Mm,
and not 20 years from now. We can be proactive now.
mm,
When it comes to pornography addiction, we're very reactive. We're
mm.
only learning about it, and it's been there for decades.
Let's start at the beginning, because with a lot of movements, a lot of kind of activist agendas, solutions are never really found in the moment, trying to deal with what's happening in the present time, because quite a lot of things like this, people don't know how it began, and problems are created from something starting. And so I'm really interested to see, you know, your generation was just before me, and I'm the generation after you. I'm 30 years old. I'm that exact demographic that you mentioned about the ease of access of it. Technology took over, and it's just click of a button. I'm watching people fuck, basically. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so what was it like for you back in your day? How hard was it to access pornography? Because I imagine there was a process, and that process makes it kind of a job to get. And then I'll, you know, then we can sort of compare the two, because to know where we came from, we'll know exactly where we're heading, because it's just going to become more accessible. So what was it like back in your back in your day, if you
Well,
wanted to get your hands on something?
after I was exposed to pornography, or the hardcore stuff, by my cousin, um, I wanted more of it. And one of the things that I learned probably about 2 years after I saw it for the first time was, you know, I couldn't go to a major big box video rental store like a Blockbuster. They didn't have pornography. They didn't rent to kids anyway. But those little mom and pop video stores that were just struggling to stay alive, they didn't care how old you were. They didn't care what
Mm.
you were renting. So I would be 14, 15 years old. And if I didn't have soccer practice, or sorry, football practice after school, or I didn't have baseball practice after school, I would hop on my bicycle and I would ride a mile and a half to this little video cassette store that there was. And one day I was just brave enough, and I went to that section of the store in the back behind the swinging saloon doors that says no kids under 18. And despite the fact I was 14, I walked in there, and I just kind of took two movies off the shelf real quick. And I walked right up to the front desk, and I put down my video rental card, and the old guy behind the counter never even looked up at me. And it
Wow.
was like, oh my God, this is fantastic. And I also, you know, I mentioned that, you know, I had problems with alcohol. I also found a convenience store that was just a, you know, a minute or two bike ride away from this video store. And I would go and I'd buy 2 or 3 beers. So here I am, 14, 15 years old. And in my backpack, I've got pornography and alcohol. So I would ride my bike home. It would be a
Mm.
couple hours before my parents came home. So I'd watch one of the videos, and I'd have one of the beers. And then after everybody went to bed late at night, I had a VCR in my room, so it wasn't any problem. I'd watch the other porn film. I'd watch the other beer. And that's how I relaxed. Even at 14 years old, that's how I relaxed. That became my way to escape. That became my way to take control in my life,
Mm.
and just block everything out of it. And that was, you know, that was how we had to do it back
Mm.
then. You know, you could find places like that convenience store that would sell you magazines without asking questions. But if you would have told 14-year-old me about the internet, I would have just been happy as a clam.
Mm,
And it was funny because when the internet started, I was one of the first people I knew who got on the internet. This was 1993. I was in my final year of high school, and I didn't know anybody else on the internet. I had the first email address of any of my friends. I had to actually meet people online to be able to use an email address. That's how early I was in getting on there. And even then, it was like, you didn't have videos at that point. This was before even web browsers
mm,
existed, because web browsers didn't really hit until about 1995. So you would go onto these news groups, which is a little bit like Reddit in some ways, but you'd go onto these news groups uh, for nude pictures, and you'd click on a single nude picture, and then depending on the size of the picture, you'd just sit there and wait, because we're talking about early days of dial-up when things were
mm,
slow, and a photo that you don't even doesn't even take a tenth of a second to hit your screen now
mm.
would take 3 minutes to download.
Yeah.
So that was one of those things where I saw the evolution of the internet, and once video clips started to become possible, I never rented another film. I never got anything on the pay-per-view on my TV. Never needed anything again, because once you have the
Mm.
internet, you really don't need anything else for pornography.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think if, on this podcast right now, if you hit a timer and gave me a specific type of scene that you wanted, I mean, we're probably watching it within 20 seconds, 15 seconds. It's crazy. And the mad part isn't so much that it's super accessible now. It's the fact that you have so much flexibility over what you can access. That just shows the abundance of pornography out there. Is that there is
Well,
something for every scenario you can imagine, every single niche, every single kink, every single fantasy is accessible.
and
And
that's because it's so cheap to produce.
mm,
You got to realize, back in my day, porn was for the straight white male, because that was the demographic that bought it.
yes, or
You
sold, yeah.
didn't create pornography for minority groups. You didn't create pornography for women or for homosexuals, because there just wasn't enough buying it to
Mm,
make it worthwhile to produce and distribute.
mm,
It was an expensive thing back then, especially go back even to the 70s, when the only place that people would see pornography was in adult theaters with real actors and stories. And now, anybody with a iPhone can produce a porn movie and have it up on Pornhub by the end of the day.
mm,
And the thing is, you can now very much target your audience. When you look at statistics of porn addiction, you're not seeing crazy growth in the straight white male audience. You're seeing a lot of growth in the bisexual audience. You're seeing a lot of growth in the audience of white women, of black men, of Catholic and Mormon people. These are where you're seeing the statistics explode, because pornography, number one, has never been targeted to them before, but number two, it's never been easily accessible in a private
mm,
manner for
mm,
them before. And now that it is, you're seeing, because guess what? It turns out straight white guys don't have the only ability to be horny in this world. Everybody does.
mhm,
And when anybody can satiate their horniness by a few clicks, and like you said, if I want to see, a cheerleader, an Asian girl, a 7 foot tall guy, and
a midget, anything.
five nuns throwing potatoes at them while Irish music plays in the background, it's not going to take very long for us to find that online. I
It's true.
promise you, it's probably
Uh,
there. And
mm,
and here's the thing that is. You talk about the access not being scary, but think about this for a sec. In your grandparents' or great grandparents' life, the amount of time that you and I have been talking now, only about 15, 20 minutes, there's some kid out there, some 12, 13-year-old kid, who in the time we've been talking has seen more hardcore sex acts than their grandfather ever did in
mm,
his entire life.
mm.
And to think that we've evolved so quickly in 2 generations that we can just take that in and process it is absolute bullshit.
Mm.
because we've been proven that we can't, yet we give every 12-year-old the greatest porn computer
Yeah.
ever invented, put it in
Yeah.
their pocket, and give them no guidance with it.
Yeah. I mean, you're pretty much saying, look, here's an iPhone, go watch people smash. Because
Yeah,
that's what they're gonna do.
yeah.
That's the first thing they're gonna do. You give them a phone, they have access to the internet. Boom, there you go. Off they go, and they get into group chats with their friends, and people they want to share this. It's an easy source of dopamine, and it's at their fingertips. Um, I'm a firm believer that awareness wins. Simple, loving awareness has the ability to solve so much of the world's problems. Now, that being said, how does somebody know they have a porn addiction? What's the measure? What's the metric?
Well, the first thing I'll say is I try to stress the fact that addiction is addiction is addiction is addiction. Whether it's pornography or gambling or cocaine or food, it doesn't really matter. When you go and you look at the brain chemistry of addiction, yes, all of our individual addictions will have different side effects and affect our lives differently. Obviously, somebody who's addicted to cigarettes is more likely to develop lung cancer than somebody who's a gambling addict. But what's going on in their brain is largely the same thing. And that is you're getting your pleasure receptors tickled, essentially.
Mm.
You've got six, everybody talks about dopamine, but you've actually got six different chemicals in there, including oxytocin, serotonin, norepinephrine, and a couple others. And what happens is, whatever reason you develop the specific addiction that you do, your brain begins to send you signals that you need more of this. You need the pleasure that this substance or behavior causes. And over time, what happens when it goes from simply maybe a hobby to a bit of an obsession to an addiction is that you begin to move to a place where you understand there are very negative effects in your behavior, but you cannot stop it.
Mm.
You need this. Your body, your mind absolutely tells you that you need this or you're going to die. And for people who are not addicts, I urge them to try this little experiment. Um, Tomorrow, when you wake up in the morning, grab your smartphone, turn up the volume, turn on every little alert and chime or whatever. Then take a Post-it note or a piece of paper and tape it over the face of your screen so you can't see your screen. And then put your phone next to you. And you're going to hear a chime pretty quickly. You're going to want to know what it says, but don't go look at it. And then there's going to be another chime. Maybe it's a Snapchat. Maybe it's a text. Maybe somebody liked one of your photos on Instagram. You're going to want to know what it says, but you can't because you can't see it. And then you're going to get another chime and another chime and another chime. And I promise you, based on people who have done this experiment for me, come between chimes number 5 and 7, you're not going to be able to take it anymore, and you're going to rip that piece of paper off the front of your phone, because we are a society addicted to their phones, and not just addicted to their phones, but addicted to that little dopamine hit we get when somebody pays attention to us.
Yep.
Oh, somebody liked my photo. Somebody, texted me to find out what we're doing tonight. Back when I was a kid, we had rotary telephones. And if somebody died, well, they had to call you. Somebody else had to call you and tell you. And if you were on the phone, well, they had to wait to tell you somebody was dead. And guess what? Once they finally got in touch with you, the person was still dead. Nothing that comes across your phone is life or death, but we believe it is. We've trained our brains to believe it is. We are addicted to our phones, and people who don't understand addiction should run this experiment, because what you'll find is that whatever the addiction is, it doesn't matter. You're going to recognize that the addiction has a hold on you. The addiction is causing negative consequences in your life. Look at all the people who are sitting in nice restaurants looking at their phone, not talking to the person across from them. That's not healthy. That wasn't happening 10, 20 years ago. And I think that, if people can understand it like that, they can understand porn addiction. porn addiction is not just somebody who uses pornography for typical masturbatory purposes, and that's that. That's a recreational user. Most people are recreational porn users, looking at statistics, especially the younger they are. But the majority of people do look at porn at least once a month on the computer in the US or North America and Europe. And with addiction, I can tell you that it was not about the naked person on the page of this or the screen. It wasn't about the video clip. It was about the feeling it caused within me. And that wasn't sexual thrills. That's why recreational users use it, or for sexual thrills. I still, I've been married now for about 17 years. I still had sex with my wife. I craved that personal intimacy we'd have. I crave that personal touch of somebody. It's not a substitute for sex when you're an addict. It may be a substitute for sex if you're a recreational user and just don't want to put in the time with your partner, or don't want to go find somebody at the bar or the pub to be with. But for the addict, they are not responding to what's on the screen in a sexual manner. I learned for myself that through therapy, it was all about control for me. Like most addicts, I was abused when I was a little kid, both sexually and emotionally. 90 to 94% of porn addicts were, depending on exactly which study you look at. And when I was being abused, I developed certain survival skills. And some of those survival skills weren't exactly well formed, because I kind of had a stunted growth that way. And what I craved was control, because I couldn't control my situation as a 4 or 5-year-old kid when the abuse was happening. So I craved this control. And if you look through my life, you're going to find all kinds of indications and red flags of me trying to get control. I've run my own companies since I was about 25 years old, because I don't want some boss telling me what to do. I'm going to create my own reality. And I have always been a bit of a control freak. And it was only through the therapy that I learned the pornography, it wasn't about the woman or the man or whatever it was on the screen. It was about the fact they couldn't say no to me. It was about the fact that, like we talked about, today I want 2 Asian women. Well, they're not going to say no to me, and I'm going to find it. Tomorrow I want, 3 men, 2 women, and that's what it's going to be. And the next day, I just want girl on girl. And whatever it is, they are not going to say no to me. When I sit down at my computer and I block everything else out, I am the master of this world. I have control of this world. I used alcohol to numb myself from the real world, but I used pornography to create this illusion of control in a fantasy world. And that's what it was about for me. I understand the average guy who just wants to go and, masturbate to pornography online. I'm not anti-pornography. It's been around since the beginning of time. You go look at cave paintings, you're going to find some hardcore stuff on those walls. You go to a museum and look at like ancient Egyptian pottery, and there's some pretty racy stuff happening on there.
Is it nuns throwing potatoes in the caves, or?
Well, it's hard to tell if those are potatoes or rocks in the old paintings. But the thing is, sexuality is part of our lives. And, healthy sexuality is a great, important thing. Sexuality is a wonderful thing to have in your life if it is healthy. Unfortunately, we don't, again, because it's sex, we don't talk a lot about that. We come from very puritanical places where people were shamed and guilted and embarrassed to, address any of that kind of stuff. And that carries through the generations even to today. So, I tell people I'm not anti-pornography, and I believe that much like there are people who can drink alcohol and keep it under control, much like there are people who can gamble and keep it under control. I believe there are people who can look at pornography and keep it under control, but those aren't the addicts. And I guarantee you that the people who keep it under control and the people who are the addicts had the exact same education when they were younger about pornography. None.
Right. So essentially a porn addict isn't necessarily based on how often they're watching or using it, but how they're using it and how they,
Absolutely.
what the metric of pleasure is for them, whether it's a
There, there are
replacement
there
or.
are there are porn addicts that use it once every 2 weeks.
Mm,
Much like there were people who were binge drinkers. You
mm,
could have somebody who's an alcoholic that drinks once a month.
mm,
It's how you use the substance. It's
mm,
why you use the substance
mm.
that really is what determines an
Sure.
addiction.
So, we've gone from, trying to, sneak in magazines from off licenses to, sticking VR headsets on and being, actually one of the actors in the porn scene. Where do you think the porn industry is going in the next sort of 10 to 20 years? Because it's now approaching $1 trillion industry. If you actually have a look at some of the big pornographic corporations are starting to gain a lot of influence over societal structure. They're making an awful lot of money. And at the moment, in the magical world of capitalism, that money does equal influence. Where do you see the porn industry going in the next 10 to 20 years, given now that we've painted a pretty sensible picture on where it came from? Where do you think it's going?
Well, the one thing you can say about pornography is that it's always forward thinking. When you look at technology, the pornography industry, to their credit, is always in front. Because here's the thing, us as people, we're always looking for new ways to fuck. And the the pornography industry understands this. They were the first to video cassettes. They were the first to the internet. They
Mm,
were the first to using streaming capabilities. Um, you know, I know Snapchat is not a pornography app, but it was developed to be one
mm,
originally. I think OnlyFans ultimately, I think you're going to find artists, musicians, other people who sell stuff like that, who
mm,
find a home there. I think that OnlyFans will eventually become less pornographic based, just like Snapchat did.
mm,
um, I think it's going to really be about the moving forward of technology and where technology heads. That's where porn will head. I would not, I would love to be the CEO of something like a Pornhub or an X videos or some of these other larger companies. What I wouldn't want to be is the CEO of a traditional adult media company. A lot of people don't recognize this because we've been so hung up in the COVID deal, but in the US, Playboy has stopped publishing. And that was not a big news story. Now, Playboy
mm.
had one time over a 7 million circulation per month in the 70s and 80s, and they dropped down. Most people didn't even realize over the last couple of years they experimented with not having nude women in the magazine. They went from a monthly to a bi-monthly to a quarterly. Why did this stuff happen? Much like why people don't buy newspapers anymore
Mm,
or encyclopedias or don't need a telephone book,
mm,
because we have the internet.
yeah.
And you can see how the internet, much as it affects regular life, it's affecting the adult industry world. And
Mm,
I wouldn't want to be paying big money for these actors and actresses who, while there is still a portion of the audience who will buy that stuff, if you're paying money for pornography on the internet, you're doing it wrong.
yeah.
You don't need to pay money to access pornography.
Mm,
You don't need to pay money to access more pornography than you will ever have time to look at in your entire life. There's a statistic that came out about Pornhub last year, which blew my mind. If you took all of the pornography that was uploaded just in 2019 on Pornhub and watched it end to end, you would have to go back to 1849 to start watching it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
oh, and that's an
That,
addict right there. That maybe that's.
oh, yeah. That's an addict and somebody who really knows how to hold on to life. But that's the thing, is that there is so much of this stuff out there. I
Mm,
don't think it's going to go the way of VR. We've been promised that since the 90s. I don't think that, people invent the real sex dolls and stuff, and
oh yeah, but VR porn's a thing.
it's a thing, but I don't think it's ever going to become mainstream. And even when I
Mm,
was in my 20s in the
mm,
90s, we
mm,
were told, oh, VR is the next big thing. VR is the next. I don't think that it's ever going to be the next big thing because it's always going to be cost prohibitive. VR
mm,
is looking at a porn clip and satisfying myself right now. How is
mm,
that really different than strapping a porn clip to my head and
mm.
satisfying myself
Yeah,
right now?
yeah.
So I don't believe VR is the way of the future.
Mm,
I worry that we are going to continue to uh, lose sight of the potential dangers of pornography if we don't start talking about it
mm,
soon. And I think that we need to worry about the fact that producing pornography is not a big deal to so many people
mm,
because you've got this generation of younger, mostly women who, well, you want to look at my boobs for $10? Sure. And back when I was in school, you could have offered a girl $500 and she would have said no.
mhm,
Um, so that tells you how quickly things have changed.
mm.
And while that's always going to exist, while technology is always going to push us in certain directions, it's like you said earlier, awareness, education. We have to talk about this so
Mm,
people understand the negatives of it,
mm.
much like smoking cigarettes.
Well, and also people taking responsibility. There's two sides to this. There's the consumers and the creators. And now at the moment, the way things are going, the consumers are slowly becoming the creators. And
Yeah.
that's that gig economy thing. And if people who are consuming this homemade pornography actually held some accountability for the fact that they're the ones creating the market for this in the first place. If people weren't going out of their way in order to getting off on seeing pictures and videos from what I would class normal people, people's
Yeah.
daughters and sisters who were studying or have jobs or whatever, if people can start taking responsibility, and that begins with awareness of, oh shit, man, my behavior is well weird, man. Why am I like creeping on this girl's profile, offering her 10 quid to get her boobs out because I want to be the first to see them? It's almost become a kink of, innocent, normal people.
Well,
Like that's a thing. Amateur porn is on the rise from what I can
but
see in
think
trend.
about it. It's a new genre.
Mm,
People I know pornography.
mm,
People
yeah.
I know, it's, OnlyFans is
Mm,
driven by women who solicit themselves to guys that they know.
mm,
And
mm,
that's the engine that drives it. I look back,
crazy.
when I was in high school in the mid 90s, if the popular pretty cheerleader, if there was a picture of her in a bikini at the beach, oh my God, that would have been the craziest thing passed around. Oh, can you believe this?
Mm,
Here's
mm,
Jennifer in a bikini. Well, look at today. Every high school girl
mhm,
has plenty of pictures of herself in a bikini on her Instagram feed. If you don't have bikini pictures, or if you're a guy and you don't have a pictures of your abs and your chest wearing some, shorts at the beach, there's something wrong with you. That's just completely normal now.
mm.
And it's also normal that there's going to be some kind of nude pictures going around of kids at school and of young adults because somebody broke up or somebody did this, and here's the porn they sent each other while they were sexting. So, with my kids, my daughter's now in college, my son is a senior in high school. They've told me every year there are these problems at school of nude pictures going around, which never would have happened when I was there. And I think it's just the natural progression of,
Mm.
if you grow up, as a 15-year-old girl, putting pictures of yourself almost naked onto Instagram, it's just a small step to send naked pictures of yourself to your boyfriend,
It's a
and
gateway.
it's just a small step from there to charge people for naked pictures of yourself that you're in complete control of.
Mm,
And that's part of the allure of OnlyFans, is the idea that the model is in control. She's not standing on a stage stripping. She's not in some cam room, online. She's in complete control.
mm,
And yeah, it's I can only imagine where porn goes after this as far as genres go, because the genre of girls I know is something that a 22-year-old guy, and I can't speak for you, but I bet if there was a completely anonymous poll done of all the women you know, there are a lot more using OnlyFans or producing for OnlyFans than you realize.
Mm,
To have those kinds of numbers explode,
mm,
I asked my daughter about it, and she said that 3 of her friends in the last 6 months have got onto OnlyFans,
mm,
and she will never do it because she knows about my story and everything that's happened. But um, you know, these girls don't think about it, and
mm,
who knows, that's the thing, is who knows what the problem's going to be. But we need to start talking about the fact that, hey, you may be playing with fire here, you may be making a mistake, much like, our parents warned us about drugs and alcohol and cigarettes and stuff when we were young and told us not to touch this stuff. We can make our own decisions when we're older, but don't touch this stuff when we're younger. What kind of a world might we be looking at if we were able to get our 12 and 13-year-olds to not look at
mm.
pornography?
Well, we have an unwritten responsibility as adults in this world to protect our children. I have a 6-month-old baby, my first one, and I'm gradually starting to see the holes in reality that I now want to protect him from. As much as every parent, I imagine, goes through that process. It's a wonderful experience. It's a great awakening, but it's also challenging, and it puts a lot of subjects at the forefront of my mind that I never really had any opinions about. I never really
Right.
paid any agency, and of course now, I care more than ever about these things. So, Joshua, let me put something to you. You are all of a sudden, you have the gavel in your hand. Okay, you are now in a high up position in governments where you can start proposing and potentially passing legislation to solve this issue. Where'd you begin?
I begin in our schools because that's going to be the largest amount of people that you can reach with the most uniform, or children you can reach with the
Mm,
most uniform message. And I make this like drug education, because I think a lot of people miss the point here. Pornography, you can talk about that as part of the sex talk, but
mhm,
pornography needs to be part of the addiction talk. It needs to be part of the stay away from this stuff talk. I think that in the health classes and in the human growth and development classes that exist, I know for myself, while we all know we all knew what was really going on. Our schools introduced us to the birds and the bees when we were 10 or 11, and they introduced us to drugs when we were 10 or 11, or drug education and being aware it's out there, and alcohol education, and here's what cigarettes do to you. And I think that that's also a great time to introduce the idea of pornography. You can make it, if parents are not going to pick up the ball, we need the schools to do it. And we can
mm,
make it very, very age appropriate. You can tell a 7-year-old child, listen, if anybody asks to see what's under your pants or your underwear, you say no. And you don't ask anybody else to see what's under theirs. And most certainly, you don't let anybody take a picture of what's under there. You don't take a picture under anybody else's, but you
mm,
also shouldn't look at those pictures. Those kinds of pictures are for adults. And then you move on. That's all a 7-year-old
mm,
needs to hear. You don't have to graphically describe pornography or sex to them. Naked people, that's what you call it. When they're 10 or 11 years old, you talk about the fact that you're probably going to stumble on the internet and find this kind of stuff. I don't think you should look at this. Some people who look at this do get sick because they look at too much. I don't want that to happen to you. Then when you get into 13, 14-year-old, I think that we need to tell every 13 and 14-year-old boy in this world about porn-induced erectile dysfunction, PIED for short. I do a coaching, advising kind of thing on my side through my website. And I had a guy last year who was 22 years old, really cool guy, smart guy. He had absolutely blown his dopamine receptors and his pleasure centers to complete shit. They are fried. They are gone. I know people talk about rewiring and rebooting. I'm going to let you know that's pseudoscience. That's bullshit. Sorry, nofap people, but that's a bunch of crap. Um, and this guy could not reach orgasm with his girlfriend. And I talked with her online too. We did back and forth. They were actually from the UK, and she was cute as a button, nicest girl you'd ever meet in the world. She was 20 years old, and she wanted to help him any way possible, but she didn't like the fact that if he was going to have an orgasm, there had to be pornography playing on in the room behind them somewhere. They developed a system where, to get him off with her, he would be in one room in their apartment, she would be in the other room of their apartment, and they would be talking to each other on FaceTime or Zoom or whatever it was they used, and basically having a sexual liaison back and forth one-on-one, because his mind told him that was pornography. And when
Wow.
he got to the point that he was ready to finish, she would essentially run into the room, and they would finish like two normal people. And that was the way that they got away from pornography with other people. Now, I know that's an extreme example, but that's a real life scary story.
Mm.
I believe, and you can think back to yourself being 13 or 14. I think back to myself, even though I had addiction tendencies already at that point, I wanted to have a girlfriend. I wanted to have real sex. I didn't want to be
Mm.
dependent on pornography at 13 or 14. If it was the only way I could see a naked girl or get off, I'd use it. But I wanted to have a girlfriend. I knew when I was 15 or 16 that was the goal. And I think that's the goal with most 13 or 14-year-old guys. But they go down this rabbit hole of pornography, and they end up giving themselves physical damage that cannot be undone in the short term. I talked to this guy recently, and things are getting better, but he's never going to be completely done and back to the way he was before. This is something we need to tell kids about, especially the boys. I think if you let 13 and 14-year-old boys know, guess what? Your penis may basically stop working like a normal guy if you watch too much porn. You're not going to be able to have sex with girls for the rest of your life like a normal guy. Is that scaring them? Yes. But is it completely truthful? Absolutely. And I think that you tell 13 and 14-year-old boys that they're sex organs may not work properly if they watch too much porn, you're going to see those numbers start to drop, especially if in the years leading up to that, you've been having this conversation already.
Mm. Interesting. That's a wild story. It's I'm kind of glad it's something you've had firsthand experience in helping these people. And I imagine it's happening in absolute abundance. These issues within people's relationships and people's lives are probably happening all around us. But because it's such a taboo subject, it's a difficult one to speak about. I mean, this
Yeah.
is way harder than talking about having an alcohol addiction or a drug
Oh,
addiction or
yeah.
a gaming addiction or sex, even a sex addiction. Having a pornography addiction kind of makes people, I imagine, a lot worried, coming across like a perv, coming across a bit of a
Well,
sleaze. Nobody
but
wants to.
that's the thing. It goes back into your mind of what is it that tickles your fantasy.
Mm,
And like any other addiction, if you're an alcoholic, you tend to start with beer, move to wine, move to hard stuff. If you're a gambling addict,
mm,
you're doing $100 a hand, then
yeah,
500, then 1,000, just to get that same rush. Well, with pornography, what happens is you have to start looking at more extreme content.
yeah,
You have to start looking at, frankly, some pretty weird shit to get the same high that you used to get on vanilla
yeah,
pornography.
yeah, yeah.
So people don't want to talk about this because I don't want to come up to you, even if you're a therapist, I don't want to sit down with you and say, I think I have a porn addiction because I find myself only being aroused by transsexual, pornography. And the fact is, the truth is, and it's something that a lot of people need to understand, both who watch and who think negatively about porn addicts. You are not the porn that you look at. You are not a reflection of the porn you look at. You're watching all gay pornography. That doesn't mean you're gay. That may just be the thing that tickles your brain stem and gets you off.
Mm,
You're looking at all, you could be a white supremacist and all you do is look at minorities have sex. That
mm,
doesn't mean you're not still a white supremacist. It
mm,
just means it's that other thing that's getting you off.
mm,
And that's the thing that, I think is holding us back to talk about this, because It's not just sex. It's not just naked people. It's about those little things in our minds, those little secrets, the stuff that we hide behind the doors, the
Mm,
skeletons. And you open those doors to people, and you're still going to be met with shame, with prejudice, with judgment, with guilt. And now, if anybody does that to me, I just am very simple. Fuck you.
mm,
But most guys are not where I am now. I've
mm,
had almost 7 years of recovery. I don't care what you think about me. I
yeah.
don't care what you think about what kind of porn I looked at and how my recovery went. But most people are still so scared of being judged, they won't seek help.
Mm.
And that's why I'm trying to get us to change the conversation worldwide.
Do you believe? I believe every fight should be fought from sort of every corner and different avenues. So, you mentioned that a start is education from a young age in schools. Perfect. Do you believe there's other avenues this could be combated? I mean, corporate responsibility, for a start. I mean, these applications, there can't be such a disconnect between social implications and corporate implications anymore. The need to make money and make billions of pounds, there has to be an end to the negligence towards the social impact of these kind of industries.
I absolutely agree with you, but I think that we're still living in a world where so many corporations, so many professionals, hell, so many podcast hosts are afraid that if you have episode number 37, pornography addiction, that it looks like that you are somehow encouraging pornography use.
Mm,
Simply by
mm,
talking about pornography, you're encouraging it.
yeah.
Um, let's consider this for a second. I'm going to say a word, and it's going to make a lot of your listeners go, ugh, and that's pedophilia.
Hmm.
Saying the word pedophilia does not make you a pedophile, but so many people in this world are afraid to say that word.
Mm,
Now, you can go and you can learn about what pedophilia really is. You can learn that it's a medical condition, blah, blah, blah. But nobody's willing, so many people are not willing to say that word because they're afraid that by saying that word out loud, it's going to somehow look like an endorsement.
mm,
And I think that's the same thing with simply the word pornography.
mm,
If you're going to say that word out loud,
mm,
as a major corporation,
mm,
that it's a problem. One of the things over here in America, one of the baseball teams, the Kansas City Royals, they actually have a seminar in their spring training days when they are practicing at the beginning of the year, where they actually bring in some experts and talk about porn addiction. They
mm,
are the only professional sport doing this with their players, who are mostly young 20-year-old guys who are exactly in this category of being susceptible to it.
mm,
And it's just one of those things. It's not catching on with others because I think you're still going to get right-wing types. You're still going to
mm,
get conservative types. You're still going to get a lot of people who say or who believe it's better to bury our head in the sand than to not talk about it.
mm,
And as a corporation, if you have 10 customers and 7 of them think it's great you're going to talk about pornography addiction, but 3 don't, and 3 may still may not use your services anymore. Well, it's so much easier to embrace the environment or battered women or whatever other cause you want
mm.
to engage, because all 10 people will go for that.
Well, I
And
mean, this is what the cancel culture kind of movement has
absolutely.
perpetuated in society. There tons of huge corporations and tons of influencers and tons of celebrities are now living in fear of speaking about certain topics because at just a click of a button or one tweet from someone, a movement can be started that literally can either end their career, end their brand, or
Right.
end their business. So now this is stopping um, certain types of awareness for certain causes actually getting out in the mainstream. These celebrities and these influencers and these businesses or podcast hosts, as you mentioned, are in an extreme position of power that can be used for good by bringing certain topics to awareness, essentially, of the masses. And that's when change can begin. We've seen it in the mainstream media over the past 20 years of how easy it is for them to manipulate the behavior of
Right.
people. And now that responsibility is gradually shifting to individual influencers, individual business owners, individual brand owners, individual podcast runners or radio talk show hosts. So the way in which they're being silenced and censored at the moment reactively is through this cancel culture movement. Whereas if you do say something a small community of people aren't happy with, they will fucking end you, and they can, and it's happening right now. How do we get over that? How do we jump over that hurdle? Like for me, I don't care about saying anything controversial. I don't care at all. You can't cancel me. I have 200 damn subscribers. I'm not scared. But you sure bet as hell, if I had 25,000 or 200,000 subscribers, I'll be sat here like, oh, fuck, man, I probably shouldn't be saying this
if
shit.
you're making your living off this, if you're running a movie podcast where you talk about, the great films of certain actors, and you have 200,000 subscribers, are you going to do the great films of Kevin Spacey? Of course not, because Kevin Spacey, we've all decided, is a creep. Forget the fact that he is a gifted, very talented actor. He sounds like a shithead in real life. He sounds like he stalked children in real life, but you can't do something looking at his art. It seems like the only person who gets around this rule is Michael Jackson, but everybody else, you cannot look at their art. You cannot enjoy what they've done, because that makes you complicit in what they did. And that's ridiculous, because I think what we look at is we determine, or these days, we define people by their absolute worst action. We treat people as two-dimensional or even one-dimensional figures, and we judge them based on their worst action. And here's the thing. We've all done some really shitty things in our lives. We all have some really twisted thoughts in our heads. And we don't want that stuff getting out there, especially if you're a celebrity, because you have this group of righteous people who are going to tear you down. But here's the thing that I've learned in my 7 years of in recovery, especially early on when a lot of people found out that I was an addict. And as I still do these interviews, as I do presentations at colleges, churches, libraries, there are still people who want to attack me for talking about this stuff, because pornography was created by the devil. And I try to explain that we're on the same page, buddy. I may not agree with your hellfire and brimstone, but I want people to be educated. I believe if people are educated, then they will make smart decisions. You cannot educate somebody in a cancel culture. And what you have to be willing to do is, when you have those 200,000 listeners, stand up and say, okay, Kevin Spacey is a total piece of shit who was in some of the greatest movies that were made in the 90s and early 2000s. Let's look at his work. And when people are like, you can't look at his work, that's when you start to have that conversation. Well, you know what? People are good and people are bad. Nobody is all good. Nobody is all bad. Hell, Hitler loved dogs, and Hitler was a great artist. But Hitler was the most evil motherfucker to ever walk our earth.
But good example that I seen not long ago, actually. I try to never watch the mainstream media, like ever. However, something came up on social media from a mainstream media company. Can't seem to get away from them, and it said something like, Piers Morgan, who's a journalist here in the UK. Piers Morgan calls for the Queen to strip Meghan Markle of her title, right? And then now all of a sudden, there are tons of people showing support on social media for Meghan Markle getting her title stripped. And then there's another pocket of people on social media going against what Piers Morgan has said. And that is the perfect example of how cancel culture not only causes a divide, but actually works. If Piers Morgan came out in the mainstream media and said, there's a worldwide avocado shortage and avocados are about to become extinct, you can bet there's going to be two different types of people. One pocket of people are going to go and buy all the damn avocados from all the supermarkets. And then the second group of people are going to create a movement called, I don't know, Avocados Lives Matter. And they're going to try and start funding this big Save the Avocados movement. And that would happen. Like, no matter what the subject, it would work. And that goes to show that now this is a tool that is being used by people of influence, by the mainstream media. And we need to overcome that.
Well, and what we need to recognize is that Piers Morgan, no matter what side you're on, is laughing all the way to the bank.
Of course.
And that's one of the things that's frustrating, and not to steer this too far off course, but that's one of the things that's frustrating about being in America right now. I am a former journalist. I am a moderate. I am super middle of the road. And for the last several years, I don't really follow politics, but I just don't understand how people have fallen under the cult of Trump, because this guy, he was a lifelong Democrat. This guy is clearly has certain mental health issues, but he tells a certain group of people exactly what they want to hear. He plays to their fears, and he gets a huge boost out of it. He also, I know, because of his ego, because I've studied narcissism, because I've studied borderline personality disorder, he gets off just as much when people hate him. As long as you're paying attention to Donald Trump, he's happy. He's proven in his 75 years, he has no moral core. He has no strong views on anything. He doesn't give a shit about abortion or the death penalty or X, Y, and Z. He cares that you care what he's up to. And that's the thing that so many people need to wake up and recognize, is that there's always somebody making money at the center of this.
Yes.
And there's always somebody making money pitting two groups against each other. You know, if you're going to have two people go to war, who's the one that really profits?
Well, I mean, you look
at the
at
bullet makers.
You look at where, you know, the vast majority of the Black Lives Matter funding's gone to Caucasian politicians. You know, they should be marching against that. And you know, without getting too much into politics, this technique is being used to engineer certain social reactions. It's right in front of our face.
That's the point.
So no matter whether
we're being
you
manipulated.
Exactly, of course. You know, but that's the matrix, really, as it were. It's an information matrix. It's an information war, and you know, in order to fix our social issues, we need to become aware of that globally as a group of people. We need to be like, actually, I think I'm going to be in charge of the information that I consume now. And when that happens, I kind of feel people of influence, people with followers, individual celebrities, individual corporations, individual micro influencers and smaller niches can actually start beginning to speak their mind, because people will be more forgiving of other people's opinions and passions. But at the moment, when it's one global information control, mainstream media latching onto celebrities and stuff, controlling the narrative, that makes everything else a fringe movement. That makes every other idea a conspiracy. And we have to let go of such a strongly held need for this mainstream narrative and educate millions and millions of people that you're allowed to have a different idea, and is absolutely normal. And I believe this change, this social change, is how we fix things like porn addiction, because that's how we can get people of influence to talk about it. Who else is doing the work that you're doing? Who else is an advocate for controlling and helping with this strange industry that is pornography?
If you take away the academics, those who are therapists, those who study this, if you take away those who are religious, those who preach about this, you're looking at a one-man show here for the most part. You know, I am, at least in my part of the country, I'm the only person who offers themselves up to colleges or to libraries or to churches to go and talk. And a lot of people are still scared to death to have me talk about this stuff. I don't know what they think I'm going to do. But that's the thing, is that I think that we need to, when I go, I do share statistics. I do like statistics, being, a journalist, and just having that kind of mind. But I also recognize that statistics can be designed to tell the narrative you want. I truly believe in pornography. Almost every statistic that's more than a year old is completely pointless now, and the pandemic has made it that way, since everybody's now stuck at home in front of their computers, likely watching porn. I think that statistics are pointless in this realm, but I think that personal stories are a big deal. And I think we need to listen to other people's personal stories and uh, give them some credence. Assume that somebody is sharing their truth. Their truth is not wrong, and that's what we need to do, is listen to other people. I think that we need to, on some levels, respect that there is truth in certain things. There's truth in mathematics. There's truth in scientific discovery. Scientists love to be told they're wrong and be proven wrong. Scientists, want to learn. The vast majority of them, at least, who are not out there just trying to make money in as part of being talking heads on Fox News or CNN, they want to learn, and they want to share what they've learned. And I think that's a noble thing. Much like a teacher wants to just teach a 3-year-old kid or a third grade kid, and not necessarily, indoctrinate them with beliefs. That comes when we get older. And I think that what we need to recognize is, are we embracing ideas? Are we embracing talking heads, influencers, and are we turning away from people who may be sharing factual information that we just don't like? Are we only consuming media that we agree with, that already bolsters what we believe, that gives us easy to digest talking points? So when I'm talking to my dad, who is an ultra liberal, or I'm talking to my grandma, who's an ultra conservative, and I'll take the opposite side just because I like doing that with them, and I'm arguing with either of them the opposite thing, they don't stop to think to themselves, might Josh be trying to say something here that's truthful? And I get that with a lot of people when it comes to pornography. So many people tell me pornography addiction isn't real. It's like, well, asshole, I've been through it. I've also been through alcoholism, and they're almost the exact same thing. So you can either trust my story, that I know alcoholism and pornography are addictive. You can trust the studies that are out there that show that it's addictive, or because you don't want to face the fact you may watch too much pornography, or you don't want to face the fact pornography is out there, you're going to or you're selling a product that somehow makes money off pornography being out there. You don't want to admit that it can be a problem. And I think that's our biggest problem in society, is that we will not look at the other side. We won't for a second suspend our personal opinions and understand maybe there's some factual context. Maybe there's some experiential context that I don't have that is actually the truth. If you told me a story of being a food addict, I'd believe you, and I don't, because I've never been a food addict. I don't know what it's like.
How did you know? Damn, is it that obvious?
Well, I know black is slimming. That's why we wear horizontal lines and not vertical.
That's it. That's it.
But that's what I'm saying, is that I think that we need to accept the fact that our beliefs may be wrong, and the healthiest thing you can do, whether you're a conservative or liberal, whatever you think of in your life, is to always be challenging your beliefs. Always be asking yourself if you're correct. But so many people in this world refuse to say these two words: I'm wrong.
Exactly.
There's nothing, you know what? When you admit you're wrong, you have just become smarter.
Well, I'm a firm believer in failing fast. Failing as fast as fucking possible. That's how evolution is done. You can adapt faster. You can evolve quicker. You could become better, more efficiently. And, if you have a look at, you have a look at social media, man. You search anything on Twitter. You search Trump on Twitter, BLM. You search a movie being crap or an anime being rubbish. That people will argue about anything, but more importantly, no one's solving anything because nobody can be wrong. No one can have their mind changed. Nobody. It's crazy. It's a huge, huge problem at the moment. And people find a lot of comfort in sitting in these echo chambers so they can have their strongly held beliefs reaffirmed to them. And it's rewarding. There's a dopamine hit in there somewhere of, yeah, you're right, man. That's that self-validation. That's the attention they're being given by being right. But what a lot of people don't understand is that almost the vast majority of their strongly held opinions of beliefs has either been given to them from their parents or given them to them from the mainstream media and sources of information that were given to them.
And that's one thing. Have you ever asked yourself, I think most people have, but I think most people don't really look at it. Might my parents be wrong? My parents could be complete fucking morons.
Yeah, of course.
And if I just follow along with them, that makes me a moron.
Yeah.
And I think that, I think we're also looking in this world of the internet, in this world of COVID, this has made it even worse because we're all online now. We're looking for our tribes, and we're looking for our tribes to fight with. And I have been in so many conversations with guys who are part of the incel movement or the red pill movement or the nofap movement. And these things are not conducive to recovery from addiction. They're just not. And I can't really get through to them because they've decided that they believe what all their friends have to say. They've decided that these guys online who, oh my God, you went 7 days without jerking off. That's a great victory. No, it's not, dude. You're still a fucking addict. It's not a great victory. You're not doing anything to change your addiction because addiction is a symptom, not an actual the problem itself. But try to talk to them about this stuff. And that's one of my big challenges is when I talk to people and, they have some of these beliefs about how to handle pornography or pornography is not real. All I have is my experience. All I have is my research. All I have is all the people I've spoken with, the books I've written. I probably have, and, I have therapists who come to me and on LinkedIn and whatnot and ask for my opinion with certain clients that they have because I have that experiential experience and they know that I can help. But I have gotten into, I wouldn't say arguments because I don't get into them. I walk away. But I've had 18-year-old guys in colleges come up to me and say that, I'm completely full of shit about pornography. It's totally healthy. It's what, is supposed to be there. And, or guys come up to me and I'm 20 days on nofap. We don't need to go to therapists. We don't need to go to rehab. This isn't about trauma. This is just about, not jacking off anymore. And it's like, well, okay, let's talk to you on day 40 and see where you are.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is that, I only want the best for these people. And I feel like I'm more open-minded than the average person when it comes to changing my opinion because recovery is nothing but changing your opinion. I first went to rehab for alcoholism before I went for porn. And about 2 weeks into it, when I started getting with the program, there was a new guy in there. He was probably about 25 years old and he was mouthy and he wasn't getting with the program. And he said to one of the counselors, he said, all this is just brainwashing. And the counselor stopped and looked at him and says, don't you think your brain needs to be washed?
Wow.
And that was one of the most brilliant things I've ever heard because this guy needed it because like me, he was using a substance. His problem was meth, but he was using a substance to escape other things, to make himself feel different, to not face the real problems. But he thought that was perfectly okay. He thought he was a badass because he used meth and got through it. And he was going to be a badass in rehab and, just ignore this stuff. Which is totally his journey, whatever. But I've learned in recovery, be open-minded to other people's opinions, be open-minded to why people think it. I watched the Democratic National Convention and I enjoyed many of the speeches. And last night I watched the Republican convention. And I enjoyed many of the speeches
Mm,
because I'm open-minded to listening to what they have to say.
mm,
Meanwhile, I know that my father was probably home watching last night, swearing at the TV with what they were saying. And my
yeah.
grandma was probably watching last night, cheering them on, saying everything they were saying was right, when it's really just opposite sides of the same coin.
At the end of the day, every single human on the planet has a different experience. That different experience each person has creates a different personality, and each one of those different personalities get projected on everybody else in the world who have had different experiences. And I think if one day we can all stop seeing that as conflict of interests and start seeing that as a difference in human experience, we could probably all start getting shit done. But until then, it's going to be very, very difficult. More micro communities are going to be created. More people are going to be pigeonholing themselves in different kind of, as you mentioned, different communities of people, different ways of identifying as themselves,
Yeah.
finding their tribe. It's just going to get more and more like this. And remember, like, divided we fall, and there's an awful lot of division going on at the moment. So at the end of the day, we all have different experiences, and if we all had a little bit more compassion over the fact that other people have had things very, very, very differently happen in their lives, and that's created certain opinions that they
Well,
have, I think
and
we'll
here,
be a much happier society.
well, and here's the thing, Jack. I'm sure that you're an expert at some stuff that I'm not. And I'm sure I'm an expert at some stuff that you're not.
Hmm.
I think it's important for everybody to figure out what they're an expert at. What can
Mm,
you lend to the table? I can't tell you how to fix a car. I
mm,
can't tell you how to play a
mm,
piano. I can't tell you how to cook a gourmet meal. Maybe you can do those things. Maybe you can teach me something. But until we recognize what we're experts at and what we don't know shit about, and shut the fuck up about the stuff we don't know shit about,
mhm,
it's going to be a lot of problems. Now,
mm,
when people come up to me and are completely ignorant about pornography, I feel it's my place to say something about it
mm,
because I have more knowledge and research and experience about this than just about anybody I've ever met. But
mm,
all of those other things, I can't tell you how to
mm,
boil an egg. And I'm not joking here. I
mm.
know you put it in hot water. I don't know how long. I don't know what you take it out with. I don't know how you open it. That's just me with cooking. I don't know a
Mm,
damn thing. But there are so many people in this world who have the same knowledge of cooking that I do, but will fight you to the death to tell you that they know more than you if
mm,
they find out that you
mm,
support a different political leader or
mm,
have a different philosophy of life towards them.
mm.
Because that's where we stand. And that's the thing. Learn what you're an expert at and shut the fuck up about the rest of it.
I completely agree, Joshua. Look, thanks for coming on. Where can people find you if they want to hear more? What's your links?
Yeah, I don't do much social media anymore because it's a toxic wasteland.
No OnlyFans? No OnlyFans account?
Nope, nope, nope. Maybe when I lose a few pounds, I'll consider it. But my OnlyFans would be called No Damn Fans, and I think that if people want to get in touch with me, the best way is to do it through my website.
Mm,
That's called recoveringpornaddict.com. And if you think you have an issue with pornography, there's a lot of resources there. There are other interviews that I've done. You can access my coaching
mm.
stuff. You can learn about the books I've written, and you can get in touch with me there. So, screw Facebook, screw Twitter. Come to recoveringpornaddict.com if you need more information.
Amazing. Look, Joshua, keep up the good work. You're clearly very passionate about this, and I believe change is due. It's never been more important to protect our children from something like pornography and other kind of violent content on the internet. I only really see this as a positive thing. Um, so keep up the good work. Thanks very much for coming on. It's been extremely insightful. I've personally learned an awful lot. I had no idea about pornography, and yeah, I'm sure one day we'll get you on again.
And thanks a lot, Jack. I can bring a message, but we also need the medium. And as I
Mm,
mentioned earlier, there are so many people who are afraid to just say the word pornography. So
mm,
as long as you're out there doing this stuff, tackling the hard topics, it doesn't matter if we agree or not. It
mm,
matters that you're getting it out there. So thank you very much
exactly.
for the platform today.
No problem. Thanks, Josh.